72 hours. That's how long it took for a Roman legion, one of the most disciplined and feared forces of the ancient world, to be completely destroyed. But what caused this catastrophe? It wasn't a larger army or superior technology. It was something far more cunning and deadly: barbarian ambushes. Rome, the greatest military power of its time, prided itself on its flawless organization and unshakable discipline. Yet even the best soldiers in the world had a weakness: a lack of preparedness for the unexpected. When the barbarians turned the terrain into a weapon, using treacherous swamps, dense forests, and deep valleys, the Roman advantage simply vanished. Imagine being a Roman soldier. You hear a crack from the forest. Before you can react, a rain of arrows falls upon you, followed by a sudden, ferocious attack from unseen enemies. Within minutes, the formation that was your safety turns into chaos. This was the terrifying reality faced by the legions during these brutal ambushes. In today's video, you'll uncover how 3 brilliant ambush tactics, meticulously planned by the barbarians, wiped out an entire legion in just 3 days. We'll reconstruct every step of these deadly traps and expose the fatal mistakes of Roman generals who failed to respond in time. And trust me, the third tactic was so devastating, it became a legend. Get ready to explore how terrain, strategy, and the courage of the barbarians overcame Rome's military might. From attacks in treacherous swamps to lightning offensives in impenetrable forests, we'll reveal the secrets behind these unexpected victories. If you're eager to understand how history was shaped by moments of strategic brilliance and bravery, like this video and subscribe to the channel. This way, you can follow more epic stories like this one and help bring history to more people fascinated by the moments that changed the world. The Roman legions were seen as the epitome of military strength, their discipline and strategy unmatched in the ancient world. Soldiers trained tirelessly to master rigid formations like the testudo, a near-impenetrable shield wall. These tactics worked brilliantly in open fields where order and structure reigned supreme. But this obsession with precision and control came with a cost: flexibility. When forced into unpredictable or rugged terrain, the very structure that made them formidable could suddenly leave them vulnerable. The cracks in the machine began to show. Barbarian tribes, often underestimated by Rome, saw these weaknesses clearly. They studied the legions, observing how their reliance on cohesion faltered when the environment worked against them. Dense forests, narrow paths, and uneven ground were not merely obstacles. They were opportunities. The barbarians knew they couldn't defeat Rome head-on, but they didn't need to. They would use the terrain to shatter the legion's formations, breaking their strength and morale one ambush at a time. One of the first signs of trouble came as the Romans marched into unfamiliar territory, their formations straining to adapt. The orderly lines began to stretch thin, creating gaps that were perfect for surprise attacks. The generals, so confident in their strategies, underestimated just how quickly chaos could spread when their forces were caught off guard. The barbarians, however, were ready to exploit every mistake. And so, the stage was set. The Romans, locked into their rigid mindset, would soon find themselves lured into a natural maze, a deadly game that the barbarians had prepared with precision. But how could a simple forest, something as ordinary as trees and shadows, become a death trap for one of the most advanced armies of its time? The forests of Germania were not just dense, they were alive with danger. For the Roman legions, they represented confusion and disarray. The towering trees blocked the sunlight, while the thick undergrowth muffled footsteps and concealed traps. But for the barbarians, the forest was home. They moved silently, their knowledge of the terrain turning every shadow into an ally. This stark contrast between familiarity and unfamiliarity gave the barbarians an immediate advantage. Roman soldiers, trained to move as a unit, found themselves in disarray as the forest disrupted their formations. Each tree became an obstacle, each sound a potential threat. As tension mounted, the first ambush struck. Arrows rained down from above, followed by warriors bursting out of the undergrowth. The Romans struggled to regroup, their lines collapsing into chaos as they fought an enemy they couldn't see. For the legions, the forest was a nightmare, and for the barbarians, it was a weapon. The general's response was too slow, their reliance on traditional tactics leaving them unprepared for such guerrilla warfare. Instead of adapting, they doubled down on their rigid strategies, trying to reform their lines in an environment that made that impossible. The barbarians, knowing this, kept the pressure constant, forcing the Romans deeper into the forest and further into despair. As the second day of the ambushes unfolded, the forest seemed to close in around the Romans, cutting off their sense of direction and escape. But what awaited them beyond the trees would be even worse, a terrain where movement itself would become impossible. What happens when even the ground beneath your feet turns against you? The Roman legions stumbled into the swamps, their disciplined march giving way to confusion and dread. The ground beneath them was treacherous, sucking at their boots and breaking their formations entirely. The barbarians had deliberately herded them here, knowing the swamp would immobilize their heavily armored opponents. Every step became a struggle, every movement slower than the last. The legion's greatest strength, their ability to move as one, was stripped away. Then came the attack. The barbarians, light and agile, struck without warning. Spears and arrows found their marks as the Romans floundered, unable to defend themselves in the unstable terrain. Panic spread like wildfire. Soldiers abandoned their positions, creating more chaos as they tried to flee. The swamp, however, offered no sanctuary. It was as though the land itself was conspiring with the barbarians to ensure the Romans' defeat. The generals, overwhelmed by the speed and precision of the attacks, issued orders that were impossible to execute. The terrain rendered even the most basic commands futile. Meanwhile, the barbarians continued to strike, vanishing into the mist as quickly as they had appeared. The Romans were left demoralized, their numbers dwindling and their will to fight fading fast. But the swamp was not the end of the barbarian strategy. As the survivors struggled to regroup, they were unknowingly marching into the final stage of the trap, a place where there would be no escape. How could the Romans endure when even their retreat became a calculated part of the ambush? The battered remnants of the Roman legion found themselves funneled into a deep valley, surrounded by towering cliffs. It seemed like a safe haven at first, a chance to rest and regroup after the horrors of the forest and swamp. But the barbarians had planned this final move meticulously. The high ground offered the perfect vantage point, and the Romans were now at the mercy of their enemies. The attack began with a thunderous roar as boulders and logs were hurled down from the cliffs, smashing into the tightly packed soldiers. Chaos erupted once more, with the Romans scrambling to find cover where none existed. The barbarians descended from the heights in waves, their strikes relentless and precise. The legions, trapped in the valley, had nowhere to run and no way to fight back effectively. The discipline that had once defined the Roman army dissolved completely. Individual soldiers fought for survival, their unity broken beyond repair. The barbarian leaders, seizing the moment, orchestrated their forces with brutal efficiency, ensuring that no Roman would leave the valley alive. What had started as a campaign of conquest for the Romans ended in total annihilation. This devastating defeat sent shockwaves through the empire, forcing Rome to rethink its strategies and its perception of invulnerability. But even as the echoes of this loss faded, one question lingered. Was this merely a failure of leadership and strategy, or did it signal something deeper? A warning that Rome's dominance was not as eternal as it seemed? Rome's legions weren't just destroyed on the battlefield. They were abandoned after the fight was over. These warriors, promised wealth and land, returned home only to find betrayal instead of rewards. But what happens when the empire turns its back on the very soldiers who bled for its glory? Discover the forgotten fate of Rome's veterans and how their anger nearly brought the empire to its knees. Watch now.